Hey everyone, welcome to our second English talk of the day. We will be talking about IBM Power System and IBM iOS, the history and security. Sorry for the little delay, but things happen. And we're going to start this with Ahmed Shah from Red Canary.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all enjoying iHack. My name is Ahmed, and I'm a security analyst at Red Canary, and we're based in Ottawa. So as Patrick mentioned, I will be talking about IBM Power Systems and IBM iOS history and security. Next slide, please. So I'll be covering why customers are using IBM Power Systems and IBM I, and what is it exactly, the history and how the systems have, the platforms have evolved, security hardening issues to be aware of, and challenges in doing research and resources that you can use to do your own research. So I'm going to apologize in advance because a lot of the terminology, it might get confusing. So when I refer to IBM I, I'm referring to the operating system. If I refer to power system, I'm referring to the server. And if I refer to just power CPU or power, it's referring to the CPU that's inside the power system. It can get a little confusing. You'll see in the history how the branding issue, how branding was done throughout the history of the platform, where it was and where it is today. Next slide, please. Uh, yeah, so why are customers choosing IBM Power Systems with IBM iOS? So the IBM iOS is a proprietary OS for IBM Power. It's using an IBM Power CPU. This CPU is not an x86 instruction set where they intended to have Windows be used as an operating system or Ubuntu. So why is this niche product used in a lot of Fortune 100 companies and also small businesses who are actively trying to maintain their system in a world where x86 is widely adopted and Windows is available and Ubuntu is widely available as well. So if you look at some of the companies that are using it and some of the early adopters, these are companies that have existed for a very long time. Some of these companies have existed since the 1800s. And if you could imagine a company that is that's quite old, how often they had to do infrastructure updates, upgrade to the latest, greatest hardware, latest, greatest operating systems. So it was kind of a fun experiment this morning. I just took the Windows executable from a Minesweeper from Windows 3.1, and I threw it into Windows 10 to see if it would work, and it doesn't. There is reverse compatibility, but I saw up to probably 1995. So if you look at these companies that are running a lot of these legacy applications, they are looking to have a platform where something that was probably written 30 years ago by someone who's probably retired or not available anymore and no longer with the company. Sorry, can you go one slide back? Yeah, no longer with the company. They can't make any updates, have these legacy applications run in current modern day times and have it running with little influence to their operations when it comes to doing migration activities of updating their hardware infrastructure. So with the IBM Power System and IBM I and the legacy of the AS400, one of the, I believe, the selling points that that goes towards customers is the low cost of migration towards the latest, greatest. Another reason customers might be looking to using these niche systems is their high level of assurance. So they advertise 99.999 up percentage uptime, which is in 1 year probably 5%, 5 minutes of unplanned downtime for a single node. And this is not considering, having kind of a dual node system. So one of the selling points is switching from a primary system to a secondary system in just a matter of seconds. And one of the testaments to how resilient their CPUs are is their CPUs are used in a lot of NASA missions. The CPUs are not necessarily the ones that are taken commercially off the shelf. They're really hardened, but it kind of speaks to the importance of, if you send a probe to Mars, there's no technician that's going to be able to be there to repair it or boot it up. So high assurance is very important. Next slide, please. So now we'll be kind of going through the history and evolution of the platform. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, legacy support plays a very important role into why customers continue to use the platform. So if you look at the predecessor systems back in the late 70s and early 80s, there was a System 38 and the System 36, and the primary languages at this time were RGP and COBOL. And the System 38 had a flat file system base, which means that there was no directory hierarchy. File names in the system had to be all unique. So another interesting thing about the System 38 was it was using a single level storage system where the pointer between memory and the hard drive was shared. So eventually both of these systems, the 38 and 36, came to merge to create the AS400. And at this point in time, C became a very popular language. So one of the things that I noticed in the history of kind of researching the history of this is that not only are they looking to support kind of legacy programs, but they're looking to make sure that the system is kept kind of up to speed with what the market demands. So C++ is very popular. So they added C++ into the system. From there on, it went from AS400, the branding, to IBM I series, was what the hardware was called. And now it's Power Systems. And when it comes to doing research, it can be kind of difficult because if you're doing it for the first time, like there's something called the I series, but there's also the IBM I, which is the operating system. It's not your iOS on your Mac phone. It's so paying attention to the branding that's being used is quite important. So today, the platform is using a lot of modern languages such as Python, Ruby, Node, and R. And kind of R suggests that it's used a lot in research. So you see at the top right of the picture, what the old System 38, 36 probably looked like. In the middle is what the green, quote unquote, the green screen, the terminal kind of looking access. And at the bottom is kind of if we are looking to buy a system on eBay, how much they can kind of go for. I'll go into that later. Next slide, please. So I'll be going through kind of security hardening issues to be aware of. Next slide. So this is something I just noticed recently in one of the portals that I have access to. So this is a website for a very big company managing probably billions of dollars in assets. But something that stands out is they have an unusual password policy from 8 to 10 characters. And this is something kind of reminds me of something that existed in the 90s, but in this particular platform in 2021, they have this unusual password requirement. Next slide, please. So on the right it's just something I kind of noticed when I was doing the research that this platform could be, I don't know, but it could be using an AS400 type platform in the background with a password level 0. So the AS400 has 4 different password levels, and level 0 is the lowest. And with that, the password level 0 has, a maximum of 10 characters. And with what you see on the right is one way to access administrative functions for the platform. So this is the web interface, what the web interface looks like for the password level. Next slide, please. The IBM Power System with IBM iOS has multiple ways you can do administrative activities. So we just looked at one of them was kind of the web. The other approach is using it's kind of old school, quote unquote, green screen, which is a terminal access. And this is using something called a terminal emulator to connect over a telnet port. So here, if you look at that green dot, I'm running a command to display sysval and password level of the system. So this is my my own system that I'm using. Next slide, please. So in here, you can kind of see kind of a different way of looking at that same password level 0 till you won't see 3. But if you go to more, you'll see the other password level. Next slide, please. So yeah, one signatures of a poor low-level password level being used is a maximum of 10 characters. Something else that is interesting is there's no password, there's no case sensitivity. So if you say you're setting a password with uppercase, you can log in with lowercase. Most likely the reason why they have this maximum length is for legacy supporting of way back when systems that were very tight on memory. Next slide, please. So another thing to look at if you're looking at an IBM AS400 type system is the amount of online services that are available. So if you do an Nmap scan on the machine, you'll probably come across a lot of ports, and some of them kind of seem to be duplicate of the same services, but one is open and insecure, the other one is secure. The first port, port 2001, that is, so as I mentioned before, there's many different ways to do administrative functions with the platform. So 2001 is an insecure port access to the website to do your administrative functions. And some of these things will show the secure ports that you can do the exact same functions, but one is secure and insecure. So this is kind of highlighting that if you do kind of an Nmap scan, you're going to see a lot of services, and it's a good idea to evaluate each one, lock them down to make sure the threat landscape is reduced. Next slide, please. Yeah, so if you do a scan, and you'll probably encounter a lot of service ports that are not encrypted. So you might have a case where you create a new user, but you think the new user is a low privileged user, but it was an observed, like what do they have access to? So if you create a new user where you're intending that they only have access to that green screen, by creating that new user by default, they might also have access to port 21 and port to the administrative console, where all you want them to do is access the green screen to update a timesheet or something like that. So with insecure ports, with the screen capture you see there is an example of running Wireshark, capturing credentials for data in transit. And with insecure data transmission, you can apply man-in-the-middle techniques. So it's good to lock down or close down your insecure ports. Likely, the secure ports are already open. Next slide, please. So as mentioned before, the there's multiple ways to do administrative functions, and if you have what you think is a low privileged user that you think is only supposed to have access to the green screen, they might also have access to FTP. What's unique about FTP in the AS400 is that you can not only download, upload files, traverse the file system, but you can also run remote commands through FTP. Another way to do administrative functions is through PowerShell, through the rnt cmd command. And one interesting thing is, let's say the user has access to SSH, they're able to log into the system. And for whatever reason, you can traverse the entire file system, or only certain parts of the file system. One thing that could be done is in the home directory, if you create a username, a new directory of the username of an existing user, and create a .profile file, you can add a script in there that if that user logs in, that script will execute on their login. Like I said, the threats landscape can be very big. Make sure that you're locking down your services and ports, because there can be occasions where what you think is a low privilege user will be able to get access to not only that management console, maybe they can get access to it, but they won't be able to do anything, any kind of write operations with it. But they'll probably also have access to the DB2 database. And if they have access to the DB2 database, there could be restrictions on permissions on inside the tables, but there could be relaxed permissions for some of the elements in the table where they're defined as public. Next slide, please. One interesting tool that was created by Bert Kulash is iHack 400. It's available on GitHub. So what this tool can be used is to attempt privilege escalation. So the user QSEC OFR, you can consider this to be equivalent as root. This is the maximum super administrator of the AS400 system. So we had experience where if you have an older system, I think this worked with IBM I version 7.2. If you attempt to privilege escalate, you put in the username that you think is the lowest privilege user. You simply you log in, click on the user that you want to escalate, and that's it. You press a button. It's a neat tool, has a nice GUI, very easy to use. There's a lot of other interesting tools in Bart's GitHub that can do scans. But this is based, I believe, on an exploit or a vulnerability he found in profile handling. Next slide, please. So next is challenges in research. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges in research, like it's the complexity of domain. There's not as much Stack Overflow entries as there would be for Linux or Windows. It's also a different domain from x86 and Windows. It's different. It's a different mindset of looking at things. And there's also with that usage of old or different terminology versus new terminology, like the usage of LPAR, is that equivalent to virtual machine, or the concept of files. So it's take for granted that when we think of something in a directory, it's a file, but looking at terminology, it was used way back. It's considered object. If you want to get access to an IBM system, an IBM OS platform, it has kind of a complex licensing scheme, so it's not straightforward. As you buy the operating system and you have free reign on it. You might have to do with entitlements such as, well, does a license entitle you to how many cores? Does a license entitle you to how many concurrent users? However, there are available resources, despite there's no, as far as I'm aware of, kind of open source tools or something freely available that you can use. There's something called pub400.com. So these guys are great. They set up a IBMI server that people have free access to. You sign up for an account and you can go into the system. You can create scripts, run programs. However, you won't have access to administrative functions. So that company does have a paid-for version where they host IBMI at cost. One interesting thing is if you want to buy your own physical hardware with the IBM iOS. So this is an example of just looking on eBay. For right now, IBM I is at version 7.4. This is for version 7.1, which has the look and feel of the most modern OS iteration. So this particular one has the entitlement for apparently unlimited users. I just kind of shopped around on Kijiji, and it's kind of interesting that they will advertise, somebody will advertise that they have an AS400 or IBM I or an I system or whatever. But if you try to ask what are the entitlements and so on and so forth, they might not know or have an understanding of what they're selling. It's mainly because these systems were probably bought from an auction or something at wholesale, and they're not entirely sure what it is. So something that's interesting is it doesn't really come with a VGA port or ports for you can hook up a monitor and click away and access. You would have to know what ports to access and to access online and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like buyer beware. If you ask questions, that's not unusual that the person that's selling the system knows entirely what they're selling. But there are companies out there that do sell secondhand hardware, and with IBM I that will know. Next slide, please. So one approach to doing research is over the cloud. So this is what I'm using is a cloud instance of IBM I over a virtualized power system. So the cost is calculated to be low. Like if you were to leave, if you were to have a pay-as-you-go account and leave your instance on for about a month, that cost is probably about $500 in 1 month. So just pay attention to if you still have your instance open, just shutting it down. But it's a quick way to do some validation and testing and experiment with the IBM I. The one interesting thing is I didn't see the latest, greatest version, which is version 7.4. I only saw 7.3. It can be virtualized. Some other interesting things that would be of interest in terms of research is IBM I think version 7.2 is using SMB version 1. So that might be an opportunity to do research into SMB vulnerabilities using Impacket. Another thing to look into when it comes to probably contributing to the community is probably extending Bert Kulash's Hack 400 tool. So as I mentioned, the tool has kind of one of the tools he has is kind of a scanning tool to look at vulnerabilities inside the AS400. So one opportunity to look at is probably extending that tool. Next slide, please. Yeah, so another thing to be aware of is the difference between a mid-frame and a mid-range. So if you're looking at an AS400, it's not a mainframe. So mainframes are different from the AS400, and the AS400 is the column on the right. So if you hear a conversation or hear things about a mainframe, it's a different processor with different instruction set, and with that, different operating systems distribution. With the mainframe, I believe there are emulators out there for I think something called Hercules, which for the really old processing architecture. That stuff, the mainframes are intended to be extremely redundant and fault tolerant with very high uptime, and the size is is about the size of a fridge. But the IBM AS400 or power system, that hardware, that power system can run IBM I and IBM AIX and a custom Linux distro called Linux on power systems. And that size, as you saw throughout the pictures, can be the size of a 2U up to the size of a fridge. Next slide, please. So here are some interesting resources partly used for the presentation. So that's Bart's link to his Hack 400 tool that you can use to assess if your system is vulnerable to privilege escalation. The RZKH is that company's freely accessible Pub 400 AS400 system. And they do have a service, a paid-for service where you can get full system access. And then there's the IBM Cloud, which you can use to do your research. Next slide. So I'd like to thank everyone at iHack and also give a shout out to Andrew Klaus for some of his research work, and also Red Canary. So thanks everyone, and have a great iHack.
Hey, thanks a lot, Ahmed. That was super interesting. Thanks everyone. The next talk is gonna start in a minute. You can switch YouTube videos. Don't forget to join the Discord for the CTF tonight. This is going to start in 50 minutes.